All right, so this lecture will show you how to add the ability for a user of this site to report that an event has inappropriate content. I'll review the functionality on my website that I already have this built in. Then we'll go in and add a new database table and store procedure. We're going to put in an update to the Database.cs. We're going to add a new class file, Report.cs. We're going to make some edits to the HomeController.cs and do significant edits to the home event.cs HTML. We're going to change CSS, HTML, and JavaScript in that. We're going to add a new function to the web2.js. Then I'm going to set some breakpoints and step you through all the code, and then we'll go through a quick summary. So before we get started on the code, I want to show you what this new bit of functionality is going to look like. So we'll bring up an event, doesn't matter which one, and you'll see these ellipses. Now these are usually used to show that there's more menu options to select, but we don't necessarily want to show them all the time. So, mobile apps or web apps will have this. So I'm going to click on it. You'll notice this panel opens up. So users can go in and report something as violent or offensive or sexually inappropriate. Could be a lot of things we could put in this list. So I'm just going to select offensive. You can see this little message saying I'm submitting this report now, and then finally this says the report was submitted, and then it gracefully just goes away. So that's what we're getting ready to build. First, we're going to add a new table and new stored procedure to our SQL Server database. So find the code for this assignment, and then there's an insert reports table and store procedure.sql file. Open that up, and it should open up inside SQL Server. You can see it's going to create a new table and then create a new stored procedure. And we're naming the table reports and the stored procedure insert reports, similar to what we've done so far. So make sure you have your database selected and then click execute. Everything should just compile fine and add the table and store procedure. If you open up your database tables, you might need to right click, refresh, and you'll see the new reports table. Right click on that, click design. So what we have is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns in this table, row ID, and this is set to an auto number, right? Starting at 1, and each new record you increment by 1. The UID that's the user's UID that's submitting this report. This is the ID they're reporting on or they're tattling on. The problem ID is, what is it? Sexually inappropriate, misleading, and then this is a Boolean, basically true or false. It says, is this resolved? We'll get to the resolved column later on. So go ahead and close that table. If you go and open programmability, you might have to refresh that, and you should see an insert reports. Let's go in and modify that. So here's the name of the stored procedure. It takes in a few properties. So what it does first is it says if this person has submitted this report already, then delete it first, because maybe they picked sexually inappropriate and they really meant to pick spam or misleading or whatever it is. So this is just a method of saying only let that person save the last report they do. So if they did the same report, if they did a report on the same event 5 times, it would still only be one record in the table, because this doesn't allow more than one for the same event. Again, if you look at the comments, if it doesn't find anything, then it doesn't do anything. So if this UID and this ID to report doesn't exist, then it doesn't delete anything. So once it makes sure that it is not already in the table, then it goes ahead and inserts it. So the first file we're going to work on is we're going to make an update to the Database.cs file. Okay, so inside the code for this assignment, there should be a Database.cs. Now, you don't want to take this whole file and bring it into your project. This is only the new method that we're adding for this. So highlight all of that, copy it, close that file out. Let's make sure that you're in your models Database.cs and paste in the code. There's nothing special about this. This looks very similar to all the other database methods. So if you want to go through that and check it out, you can. I won't go over it very much. Save that. So now to compare that new method that we put into the Database.cs file, it's going to call that new stored procedure insert reports, right? And this is going to bring up, here is what it's calling, and it's expecting 3 parameters: UID, ID to report, and problem ID. And you'll see that we're calling it with those same 3 parameters: UID, ID report, and problem ID. Okay, so for this new piece of functionality, we're also going to need a new class. So in your Solution Explorer, right-click, click Add Class. We're going to name this Report.cs. Okay, there's the structure. We don't need any of this stuff here in this class. Okay, we're going to start out by adding those. Basically, we're going to add these same parameters that we saw in the table. They're going to match them pretty well. So first is the row ID. So it's a public long row ID. It's given a default value of 0. Next is the UID. Same thing, given it a default value of 0. And if you remember, the next one is ID to report. Same thing, it's a long, given it a default value of 0. And then that last Boolean value, that resolved, and we're going to set that to false as a default. Okay, put a few empty rows in there. Now we're also going to create one of the problem types, right? So you could say this is misleading or a scam, it's offensive, it's violent. So now we're going to create an enum, just like we had before, for this. So public enum, problem types, right? This is the structure. And I always start my problem types with a default of no type. Oops. And then we're going to add misleading or scam. We're going to add sexually inappropriate. Offensive. And these values that they get at the beginning when you're first building this, it's really arbitrary. But once you set them, they've got to remain these values. So I'm going to tidy the code up a little bit. So I've got a public enum problem types. These are the different kinds of problems, right? No type, misleading 1, sexually inappropriate 2, offensive 3, violent 4, and spam 5. Now I could have named these anything I wanted, but as long as I stay consistent in my database, yeah. So now I've got my general structure. So in order to use this problem types enum, I've got to create a property, right? So public problem types, which has got to match this, and I'm naming this property problem type, singular, and I'm defaulting it to no type. So now we're going to add 2 methods. If you open the files for this assignment, you'll see a file for Report.cs. Open that. There's 2 methods. Make sure you come all the way down and include that curly brace at the bottom. Close that out. And in between the properties and the enum, go ahead and just paste that straight in. Now, there are times that it doesn't format properly. You see where the case is? These returns should be tabbed in. if they're not, if they're lined up like you see here, just do a Control Z. What that is it's saying undo. So when I pasted this in, Visual Studio tried to fix it as it saw fit, but it's the wrong thing to do. I don't want that to be tabbed at the same level as the case statements. Okay, so go ahead and save that. Now these are just two. This is a property procedure that says get me whatever the problem type is. Get me the text for it, right? Because we can't just use this because it doesn't have any spaces in it. So this is now trying to get a properly formatted text message. So that's what problem text does. And then there's another get problem text that does the same work. We'll go in and talk about that, why both of those are needed. Okay, now we're going to add a snippet of code to the home controller. So go to the assignment files and open up HomeController.cs. Copy that. This is a JSON result. We'll look and see how this is very similar to some of the other stuff we've done. So copy that and close that file. Then open up in your Solution Explorer, open up your home controller from your project. Scroll down and you'll see toggle event like and rate event. We're going to add a method that's very similar to both of these. So above the HTTP post of either one of those, put a few lines in there, empty lines, and paste. So now this is save report. We'll go over what this is, what this does, and how it works here in just a minute. So go ahead and tidy that up a little bit and save that. All right, so before we get into adding the code into the view, I want to let you see what this looks like again. So as we're going through it, it'll make sense. So right now, behind the scenes, there's a panel here. There's a panel above this thumbs and these stars that we've hidden, right? And if you press F12 on your keyboard, click this icon and the ellipses, it'll get you down to that area and you'll see the report panel right now. And that report panel is display none, right? Because we want to hide it when we first come in. Now the HTML is there. We just, because we have display none set, it's not showing. And we can prove that by just saying, clicking there, and instead of display none, we're going to put display block, right? So there it is. This just shows that HTML is there when the page first loads, but we're just hiding it to start, right? So I'm just refreshing my page. So when I click on this, our code has to first show this panel, right? And then of course there's going to be, we're going to have to populate this drop list. When we click this X here, or if we click the ellipse again, either one of them will toggle this panel to be closed or open. So if I click the X there, let me open it again, or I click the ellipses again, that's the same as just toggling this display property and toggling it from right now, it's display block. But when we click this, we're going to make it display none again, right? All right, so just open it up again. And as soon as I pick something in this, it's going to detect that I picked it, and it's going to show a panel that says something to the effect of saving your report or loading the report. We'll see what it is in just a second. So I'm going to click one. There it is, submitting report. It shows a little thing, and then it shows I'm finished. So now that we've gone back over this again, and so when I go through the code here in just a minute, it'll make sense. Okay, so we're going to start off by bringing up the home event view. So inside Solution Explorer under Views, Home, bring up the event.cs HTML. Underneath the last CSS property there, put a few empty lines in. Make sure that you don't paste inside this. You want to paste outside of that block. Open up the files I sent for this assignment. There's a file, event view css.txt. Open that up, copy everything in there, close it, and then paste inside the styles tag. All right, so as soon as you paste, do a Control Z. So again, I pasted this, but Visual Studio tried to reformat it, and I didn't want it to in this case. So this is what it's reformatting it to. It takes up more space anyway. Control Z. I'll come back to the CSS and go through what some of these properties are doing as soon as we add the HTML for the page. All right, let's start to add the HTML to this view. So underneath the close button, right, underneath that, put some empty lines in there. We're going to start off. Want to make sure the user is logged in. We don't want to allow somebody to try to report something if they're not logged in because we don't know who they are. So again, we're going to use the same structure we've used before, right? This is just starting the code, and we're going to continue to add more to it. So right now, this is saying whatever we're going to do in this code, if the only do this if the user is logged in, or in this case, we're using this is authenticated property again. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the small ellipses. And it's going to be a font awesome ellipse. So we're going to name this, it's a span tag. We're going to name it report-ellipses, right? Gives a tooltip of report. And it's got the I tag in there, just like you've seen, FAR. This is the ellipse, and this is the size, and again, the ellipse. So this is just the code that just shows those three ellipses. Let's add another section here. Okay, so we're going to add, now this is the panel that we're going to hide and show, right? So we're going to always have this span tag. We're going to, the ellipses itself, we're going to have that image showing all the time. So when we click to open and close it, inside this report panel div is where we're going to show that HTML. So let's go ahead and add another div inside that. Okay. Put a few empty lines in there. We're going to put a p tag in. P tag basically is just a paragraph tag. Really what it does is it just gives space below, for the most part, below your text. Okay. This is a circle, a red eye with a circle around it. So this is just a font awesome. We'll show you what this is in just a second. Here's the ID. Here's the class, right? That's the HTML and what it's going to look like. All right. Okay, then we're going to have the words report this as. Now we're going to create our drop list, all right? And of course, in HTML, it's a select list, right? So we're going to name this select list report list. Now, each one of these, right? If you remember what's in an HTML select control or drop list, what's inside it is individual option items, right? So in this case, we're starting off, the first one is going to have an option value of 0, and the text is going to show the word select in parentheses, right? So we're going to continue to add these. And remember, a select list option has two properties. One, the value or the ID that's associated with the phrase or the word that you're going to have in the item. So let's go ahead and add a few of these. Let's see, we're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more. So we're going to get rid of this and this. So now we're going to add 5 more, just little templates here. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so now we've got it, and we want to display the values of the different options that they can pick, right? So if you go back to your Report.cs, remember these are the different options that you can report, right? Misleading or scam, sexually inappropriate, offensive, violent, or spam. Let me go back to that. So now we're going to add those particular options. And this first part, Okay, so we're going to add to the first one the misleading or scam. So in order to do that, we've got to say, hey, here's the ID that we want to display. But then we've got to do, for C#, we've got to convert it, because even though that's a numeric, it still comes across as text. So we're going to convert that to the ID for that. So this is a convert.toInt32. You've seen this before in the class. So that'll give, in this case, since it's misleading or scam, once it changes that, what's that ID? An ID of 1. So when the code is finished and it's executed, that's what it's going to come back to the browser as just the number 1, right? So all of this is just the Razor code for the value 1. And now next, we want to get the phrase, right? So we wanted to get the value for misleading or scam, which is a 1. Now we want to show the phrase misleading or scam. So inside there, let me undo that for a minute. You don't have to put empty rows in. I just want to go over what this is going to look like. So inside, so for the phrase of this drop list item, we're going to use the get problem text. So I'm going to jump back to the Report.cs, get problem text, right? It's going to pass in a type, and it's going to return the phrase for that type, right? So if we pass in report or problem types dot misleading or scam, we're going to return the phrase misleading space or space scam. So go ahead and go back to your HTML. So that's what is happening for this option. We're getting the value for misleading or scam, and then we're going to display the phrase misleading or scam. So I'm going to reformat this. Okay. So again, let's go over this one because we're going to use this as a template for the remainder. So first we have a value option is the numeric value for misleading or scam, and then inside the option start tag and the option end tag, we're going to add this snippet of code, right? So you got it. Razor says you have to have the ampersand web2.models.report, which is the class, get problem text, which is the function we looked at, and we're going to say give me the text for misleading or scam, and that's what's going to be inside here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that for the other 4 properties. Now I'm just going to paste these in. So for these other 4, right over top of those, that's what this is all going to look like, right? You have 1. This is the one we went over. This is the misleading or scam. Now you're just going to add the other 4: offensive, sexually inappropriate, spam, and violent. Those are the IDs. And then you got to do the same thing for the text that you want. So misleading, offensive, sexually inappropriate, spam, or violent. Okay, so that completes the drop list that we're going to select. Underneath that, okay, now we'll add the HTMLX. So that ampersand times represents an HTMLX. This is just a span that we're going to close the panel. Okay, so let's tidy up the code a little bit. We're going to get rid of all these empty lines of code here. Okay, so next, after the report has been submitted, now we have to message the user and say this finished successfully. So we have a panel ID report submitted. It has check and just the phrase report submitted, period. Okay, now our last div, just under that div, we're going to add another one. And this is report failed. So if anything happens to go wrong inside the JavaScript, this section will pop up and say that. So it's nothing special. Try a red triangle, and it shows this phrase. So save all. Now we're going to add some jQuery to make these panels open and close. scroll to the bottom of this view. So you should already have this JavaScript. At the end of the set active menus line, put some empty lines in. We're going to add some code. Here's the first piece. This is to, when we click on report ellipses, when the click event happens on the panel that has an ID of report ellipse, it's going to say toggle report panel, right? Fade toggle means slowly do it and do it at this speed. Medium is just a particular speed. So when we click on report ellipse, it's going to either hide or show the report panel. And remember what that report panel was. That was this whole div that's basically everything, right? That's all of this here. So back down to the JavaScript. So again, we're adding a new jQuery command that says when I do the click of report ellipse, then toggle the panel. So if it's open, close it. If it's closed, open it. Okay. Got another command here. This is when we do a click of the close, right? So when we click close, we're going to hide. If it says report failed, we're going to toggle that or just hide that. And then we're going to toggle the panel, right? So if it's open, it's just going to close it. Same thing. If it's closed, we're going to open it. So this, again, if you remember, the $sign is the short for that, right? You can either say jQuery or you can show that $sign. Okay, we have one more section of JavaScript to add. Just under that, okay, we're going to add another section. So report list, right? When the drop list is changed, right? That's what this method is. Before we're doing the jQuery click, but now we're doing the jQuery change. So when this drop list changes, so when a user selects something different in it to begin with, it first says if it's 0, don't do anything. We don't care because 0, if you remember, is just the default. That's just saying, hey, it's empty. So once you change that drop list, it shows that report submitting, right? It shows this span, and that's the little panel that says submitting report, right? We've got that closed by default right here, right? Display none closes that until we change it. So this says show that little panel, and then we've got to add this JavaScript function. Then it's going to call the JavaScript function save report. It's going to pass in who the user is. It's going to pass in the event that they're going to they're going to save this report, and then it's passing in the actual drop list. Okay, so now in your Solution Explorer, bring up web2.js. We're going to add some code to that. So if you go to the files for this assignment, there should be a web2.js. Right-click, open that with Notepad, and you're going to do a Control-A to copy to select all of it, and a Control-C to copy. And then inside your web2.js, at the bottom of this code file, paste in the code we just copied. I'm going to tidy it up a little bit. This is that method, right? That's this method here back into the event HTML. That's this function call. So if we would have called this before we pasted it into web2.js, it wouldn't have done anything because it didn't exist yet. So back to the web2.js. So this is the function we just pasted in. This should look very similar to some of the other code. The rate event and the toggle event like. All this looks very similar. So we're passing in a UID. So the person who's making this report, we're passing in the event ID of the person, the event that the report is happening, and what ID it is. So is it misleading? Is it sexual? Is it inappropriate? So that's just making this little JSON structure. Then we're calling the jQuery function Ajax. And this is, again, this is almost identical to the other code. The type is a post. Here's where we're posting to, the home save report. And that's if you go to the home controller, that's that code we pasted in a little bit ago, save report. It's going to pass in the Ajax data. That's all of this. That's that structure. So again, it's passing in the 3 properties that we want. And then on when it's successful, right? When it's successful, it'll jump into this code. What do we want to happen when it's finished? We want to hide that report submitting, right? We want to hide that. We're also going to hide the actual report content. And then we're going to show report submitted. There's another panel called report submitted on that view that we haven't talked about yet. So back in the event.cs HTML, scroll up to this. That's this panel, report submitted. And all it does is it just has a little image, a check mark, and it says the phrase report submitted, right? So it's going to show that. And then it's going to hide the report panel, and it just does a delayed hide, right? So it's going to wait for 4 seconds. That's what the delay is. So after 4 seconds, it's going to do a slow hide, and it's going to take care of these other things. So we want to now, once we're finished with this whole process, we want to hide all these panels so we go back to the way it was before we said we want to do a report. So that's what all this code's doing. I'm not going to go over this error section much. Again, this shouldn't happen, but if it does, if something goes wrong, you'll see this error, and it'll show this report failed, right? It's going to hide these others and show this report failed, right? Save all that. All right, so now we're going to take a look at the code. So before we do that, in the Solution Explorer, double click on the Properties icon, and make sure the web is selected. And inside Start Action Specific Page, make sure Profile Sign-In is set. If it's not, edit it and save it. Okay, now we're going to add a little bit of code that'll speed up our testing process, but you have to make sure that you remove that code before you move it to the ITD server. So open up Profile Controller and go down to the Sign In view, right? The sign in always, when you publish it, will always have an empty model. But for now, we're going to make this a little easier and faster for our testing. You're going to add this code. First, you're going to want to comment that return view out. Now, the code I have here is for one of my users in my database, right? So if you bring up your tables, and if you take a look at your table, I'm using this ID. So I'm setting user ID is the Bill 1, right? Password is the password for Bill 1. First name and last name, email address, and the UID. So all of these properties match an existing record in my table. You have to pick one of the users in your table that you want to use for this testing. So it might not be any of these. You may not have this record at all. So make sure it's one of your records in your table. Then we're going to execute the save user session. And then we're going to redirect to the event, the home controller, event view, and pass in an event of the ID of 15. Now, again, that has to match one of your events ID. So if I open up that table, I'm using this event here. Okay, so this ID has to match an ID, one ID in one of your one of your events. So I'm using ID of 15, and then I'm I'm going to that page, right? Let's take a look at that right now. So it's going to the sign-in view. I'm doing my code, right? I'm signing in. It's faster, so you don't have to actually type in a username and password and for every time you want to refresh and take a look at what your code's doing. So now go ahead and stop that from running. We're going to let this code sit for a minute. Let's go back to this event.cs.html. I had one little snippet of code that I was missing. Underneath the p tag here, put a new line in. We're going to add this new line of code. This is the panel that pops up as soon as the user clicks the drop list item, telling them that they're submitting the report. So this thing only stays up for a few seconds. Let's scroll to the top of this, and what we're going to do, go ahead and highlight all of this CSS, and we're going to comment this stuff out. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to show the effect that this little bit of CSS has on our page. So go back to your page. I'm just going to hit F5. So now, because I don't have that CSS hiding these, and it's not formatted exactly like we want it either, but the fact that these are all showing right now, of course, is a problem. But our CSS at this point does all of this work. It's just hiding things, putting borders around it. I think there's some colors missing. So I'm going to undo that. So go back to your code and undo, right? Or uncomment. You can undo as well. And come back to your page again and F5. So now it looks the way it's supposed to look. All right, so let's dive into some of the CSS. So for a minute, I'm going to comment that out, report ellipse. So comment that out. And these two properties now won't be set for that. So the vertical align middle and the margin left. So if you do that, save it, come back to your browser, what you're going to see is this ellipse is not going to be centered in this button. It's going to be pushed to the top, and it's going to be over to the side. All right, so check it out when I refresh. See that? So of course that doesn't look quite as good. So that's what these two pieces are. It's saying vertically align this in the middle. So the ellipses here should be vertically aligned in the height of this button. So there's an invisible div around these two, but it's right now pushed up to the top of that div. We wanted it in the middle, and we want the left margin of this to be over a little bit. So it was just a little too close. So we're going to undo that. The report panel itself, let's go back to the page. So let me F5 this, and you'll see this changes back to the way it should be. So, all right, so when I click this, there's a lot of things that's happening here. One is there's a margin top and bottom, right? Because we don't want this HTML, this little div, we don't want it shoved up to the bottom of this. We need some white space in between it. And the same thing here. We want white space in between this. That's the margins. Now, there's also, it's got a border of a certain color. It looks like a dark gray or a gray. Then we've got a light yellow inside. But we also have padding on the inside. Okay, so let's go back in and take a look at that before we get too deep. So display none is what makes it invisible until the user clicks the ellipses. The margin top and bottom, that's what gives this white space in between here. Those are the margins. Padding is different. Padding is what the inside, so my margin of this box here, this div, is outside of the div itself. But padding is what anything on the inside, it won't let it get closer to the side. So if we go back to the code, we see we've got a padding top and padding bottom of 0.25 ems. And that is here, this padding top and the padding bottom. And then the padding left and right is 0.75. So here and here, these are 0.75. Okay, so those are padding. Now the other stuff is pretty obvious. Background color, I just chose light yellow. You could choose a hexadecimal color. That's the same as light yellow, but I think the name colors are much better. The border, 1px, solid dark gray. Again, another named color. 1px, let me zoom in on this. So it's a very small line, very thin line. And yeah, back to the code. And then the last thing is the border radius. Now, again, I've talked about this before, but the border radius is for Firefox, Chrome, and Microsoft Internet Explorer. So that's why all these are showing. And that's why you get the radius down here. Okay. The report close. So this is the, let's go down here and show you where report close is. That's this panel here. It's got the HTML in it, right here. So it's black. Float right says push it all the way to the right-hand side of my parent. This font size just shows how big this X is because it's just an X. It's a font, so you can give it a size. We're making it bold, so it's a little thicker. And the actual padding top and padding top and margin left are set. Padding top, it keeps it in the middle. There's another div around this, so it keeps that in the middle. And then what's the last one? Margin left. So that margin left gets this little bit of space in between these two. Here's something I've talked about before, but I'll go over it again. These are two different IDs, right? Report close hover or report ellipse hover. So whenever we hover over either one of those, I'm going to change the color red and change the pointer. So, and I can do both of these in one step just by putting a comma in between them. So let me show that. When I hover over that, that's where it gets the color, and same thing here. Okay, the two panels, report submitting and report submitted, sorry, 3, and report failed, all, again, can be, if you're giving it the same properties, you can put a comment in between them. And I'm saying display none for all of those, right? Because I want all of those to be hidden when the user first comes to the page. The report failed red, that's just making the text for that all red. Margin left, this is used in a couple of spots through here. I'm not going to go into it, but it just adds a little bit of margin, sorry, margin right. I think I said margin left. Margin right just adds a little bit of margin right to some of these items, just so I get a little space, in between all of them. All right, so now we're going to set some breakpoints in the code behind and in the JavaScript and step through all this code. Check it out. So we can close event CS HTML, and that's it. Okay, so let's go ahead and set a breakpoint inside Profile Controller if you don't have it open already. Inside Profile Controller in the sign in action result, let's put a breakpoint there. Again, this is our testing code. Do not submit this when you push it to ITD, the ITD servers. What you'll want to do is you're going to do this and comment that back in. That's how that sign-in method should look when you publish it. Okay, so for right now, there's the breakpoint. I'm also going to put a breakpoint in the problem text. And in the Database.cs. And I'm also going to put it in the home controller. Open the home controller and save report. Okay. Now, if you might have noticed something, this line of code. So that code, because when you're working locally on your computer in your database, if you have your database on your local computer, you need a little bit of time to go by, basically to sleep. so you can see the actions happen. And I'll show you what happens when we take that 3 second. So this is 3,000 milliseconds, which is 3 seconds. So this is just pausing for 3 seconds before it does the work and returns back. So we've got a breakpoint there too. Okay, let's go ahead and kick this off. All right, we got a breakpoint. We're setting this user. Again, I want to really drill this home. Normally, you just have that line of code and this, which returns an empty user object. But instead, we're saving ourselves some time and testing, so we don't have to log in. So we're acting like those lines there is acting like you went in and typed in the username and password, and then it saved that to the user session. So I'm just going to let that continue. Okay, so now we're in problem text. And right now, or sorry, get problem text. So right now it's looking for the problem text for misleading scam. Zoom into that a little bit. You see the tooltip maybe. So the problem text variable PT is misleading scam. So you'll see it jump down to that code. And it's going to return the phrase misleading or scam, right? Okay, the next one, it's going to get the probably, yep, the violence one, or sorry, the offensive one. Run it again. Sexually inappropriate. And again, this is happening. We're jumping into this code. If you go back to the home event view, it's doing that because of each one of these options in that select list, right? We're calling get problem text and passing in misleading or scam, offensive, sexually inappropriate, spam, violence, however many you might have. Maybe you have 7 or 8 more, 10 more of those that you put in. So that's why the get problem text breakpoint keeps setting. Okay. Okay, and this last one is the violent. So I'm going to go ahead and take this breakpoint off since that's the last one. We don't need to step through this code anymore. We feel pretty confident about it. Just F5 to continue it. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. We're going to go ahead and open this up. We're going to pick one. So now we have the breakpoint inside save report, the save report function inside web2.js, right? And it's going to pass in the UID of the user logged in. It's going to pass in the event ID and which problem that they pick, spam, whatever that is. So we're going to step through this one at a time. So the Ajax JSON structure is populated. If you hover over that, you can see the values. And it's getting ready. I'm going to put a breakpoint down in the success and then a breakpoint down in the error. So either one of those happen, I've got a breakpoint set. So I'm just going to continue. Okay, so it hasn't finished. It hasn't finished this call. It hasn't jumped into these because again, the Ajax calls are asynchronous. So it ran through this, and as soon as it comes back, it's going to jump into whichever status, success or failure it runs into. So now we have not there home controller. We have a breakpoint and save report because that's what just executed here, right? We just said go to the home save report, the home controller, the save report method. That's where we are here. These are the values we passed in, right? So it's got to get it. It's going to execute a database method. So again, it's just got to get an empty instance of that. Okay, so it's going to get an empty database object, so it can make that database call this here. First, it's going to pause for 3,000 milliseconds or 3 seconds. And we'll take that out here in just a minute, and I'll show you why we're pausing there. Okay. I'm going to jump into the insert report function, right, or method. So here's the name. We're going to execute that insert reports stored procedure, passing the properties in that it needs to. Does the work right there, execute reader. Okay, and we're going to come back and I'm going to continue here. You'll see we jump back into this save report method inside the web2.js. So it executed up to here, and then it waited to see, do I get a success or do I get an error? In this case, we get a success. So then we're going to hide the things. We're now going to basically tell the user everything's finished and completed successfully. So we're going to do a few hide. We're going to show the report submitted. And then we're going to wait 4 seconds, right, before we close the report panel completely. And then we tidy up some other things as well. But this will pause for 4 seconds before it closes it up, even though the work's already done. So we're going to see that now. Okay, so it's sitting here waiting, and then it goes away. Okay, so let's go in. I'm going to stop this from running. We're going to go in and take a look at that. We're going to take all breakpoints off because we've gone through all the code. So debug, where is it? Delete all breakpoints, I am sure. So now you're going to see how fast it is without the 3 millisecond pause. Where did I put that? There it is. Let's take this out for a second. We've got all the breakpoints off. So without the pause, so it's so fast, right? At least on my machine, because the database is on this same machine, it makes that database connection so fast you don't see some of the steps. So again, once I move my site to the ITD server, things are going to run a little slower because we're going across the internet. So you'll be able to see those other things. We just don't need to see. We need to see them when we're debugging this, just so we know all this stuff is happening. Okay, just a short recap. So we added a new table into our database. We added a new stored procedure to be able to get the data, or actually put the data into the database table. We had a new database method, right, that executed that stored procedure that puts the record into the table. We added a new class, right, the Report.cs, because we needed properties to be able to set things. We added this test code. So again, let's go ahead and take that code out now. We no longer need it. Now I'm going to use it for some other videos. So I'm going to leave this stuff in, but I don't want you to leave it in. Your code should look like that. We added, we put in, let me go back to the HTML. So the home event view, we went over the CSS here and just we turned the CSS on and off to see how it had the effect that it has. We added a whole new section of HTML, right here, well, including that. We added several, got a little tidiness here to fix, right? Code should look good. We added these 3 new sections. So these are things that happen, events that happen on that page. And when these events happen, like the user clicked the report ellipse, or the user clicked the report close, or the user clicked a different item in this drop list, and we're executing some code. So that's all inside the event.cs HTML. And then we added the real meat of this is this function, the home controller save report function, and then of course the database insert report method. And that is it.